Welcome back to another lecture series here. This week I'm going to be breaking down and connecting five major events that we've either already started talking about last week or are talking about this week from our reading. Those being the Protestant Reformation, the founding of the American colonies, the Enlightenment movement, the American Revolution, and French Revolution. So these five events are definitely connected in some way, and I'll try to show how they are all connected. So as we have seen so far, most of these big events through Western civilization are connected in some way, and it's just a matter of sort of connecting the dots to see where they actually connect. So the last time we left off, we were talking about the Renaissance, which was that explosion of art and culture and the rebirth of classical Greco-Roman culture. And while we usually tend to think that some of these events happen in a vacuum, like one event ends and another begins, that's usually not the case. A lot of time these major events and movements in Western civilization really overlap. So really the Protestant Reformation, for instance, is happening in the midst of the Renaissance. We also tend to think that as we read and study these events, that perhaps everyone at the time knew the significance of these events or actually knew what was happening, when the truth is most common people probably had no idea they were living in the midst of a huge Renaissance or a Reformation. They really didn't know the significance of what was happening. It's only later in history when we study and look back that we understand the true significance of most of these events. Okay, so we will start with the Reformation, and I know we actually started reading about this last week and had some discussion questions on this, so you're probably familiar with the Reformation. So really the Reformation really focuses heavily on Martin Luther and his rift with the Catholic Church. So at its heart, the Reformation was a response to what some felt were distortions in the Catholic Church. The end result, of course, would be the division of Christianity into either Catholicism or Protestantism. The Catholic Church at this time, really the word Catholic really even meant universal, so it was the one Christian church for everyone. Of course, other than there was the Eastern Orthodox Church, but in Western Europe there was one universal Catholic Church, and the church was the supreme power at this time. They held an immense amount of power, and the Pope was at the top. The view of Christianity at this time was really rather bleak. Most people felt that they were sinners, that they were face a harsh judgment from an angry God, and that their only hope was to work hard, and maybe with the help of your local friar or priest, maybe you could get into heaven, or at least purgatory. And you didn't really know what the scripture said because it was all in Latin, and you couldn't read, and if you could, you couldn't read Latin. So you really just put all your faith into the clergy to develop your relationship with God. So there was real no personal relationship with God at this time. The clergy was your only access to God. And this was obviously a much different view than what we have of Christianity and God today. And Luther saw an opportunity to correct this. Now, before I get to Martin Luther, let's first mention a few key people that preceded him. Schaeffer talks a little bit about Thomas Aquinas, who was a Dominican theologian who began to support some of the new emerging ideas of humanism, the idea that people could rely on their own human wisdom. And this was a new idea when it was coming out. Aquinas supported the idea that people were free to mix the teachings of the Bible with other non-Christian philosophers such as Aristotle. So this was a very innovative approach to Christianity at the time. Aquinas brought the Aristotelian emphasis into the philosophy of the Middle Ages and set the stage for the humanistic elements of the Renaissance. And then now, closely related to Luther was both John Wycliffe and John Huss, who helped set the stage for the Reformation. While the Renaissance began to awaken thought, it also shed light on distortion in the church, such as the authority of the church taking precedence over the teachings of the Bible. It was almost as if the church had become more important than the Bible. So John Wycliffe taught that the Bible was the supreme authority, and he translated it into English for the masses. So this is kind of one of the first steps in the Reformation. And then John Huss also supported the Bible as the final authority and advocated the teaching of Scripture and a return to the ideals of the church founded by Christ, not politics. So the church had become very, very political, and these men felt that it was not about the politics, it was about the teachings of Christ and the Scripture. So as we know, Luther, though, is often remembered as the father of the Reformation, even though these people before him did a lot of great work. That we typically associate the Reformation with Luther. And of course, it's when he nailed his 95 Theses on the door of the church in Wittenberg on October 31st, 1517. Now, what was Martin Luther advocating? Martin Luther preached that salvation comes through faith alone, in the finished work of Jesus Christ on the cross. So his view was that salvation was about the belief and the acceptance of that, and not through these other practices and rules that the Catholic Church had set in place. He felt man didn't need priests or bishops to assure them salvation, that came from God himself. Now, this was a revolutionary idea at the time, and also a very controversial idea as well, because all of a sudden, if you take out the importance of the priests and the bishops, what is their point? Why do they have all this money? Why do they have all this power if you can have your own relationship with God? Martin Luther then translated the Bible into the common language at the time in Germany, and because of the brand new Gutenberg press, people could soon search out the truths in the Bible for themselves. So for the first time now, people themselves could read the Bible and see what it really meant and start to develop that personal relationship with God. Okay, now, in addition to the efforts of Martin Luther in Germany, additional Reformation efforts were being carried out in other parts of Europe, most notably by Ulrich Zwingli in Zurich and John Calvin in France. And of course, John Calvin in France gives us the Calvinist movement that you might be familiar with. So all these men are now taking up efforts to try to reform the Catholic Church from what they saw were inconsistencies in that church. Now, it goes without saying that the Reformation was long and complicated, and it also led to a lot of conflict and war, including the 30 Years' War. So the Catholic Church and the states and governments that they controlled were not going to just let these reformers change things that easily, and it led to a lot of war. Now, the importance and significance of the Reformation cannot be understated. I really think it's easily in the top 10 of the most significant events in history. Up until this point, you got to remember, for the last 1,000 years, there had been one church in Europe, the Catholic Church, and that church had accumulated a massive amount of wealth and power and influence. And it was easily the most powerful organization in all of Europe at that time, and the Protestant Reformation would drastically change that forever. The Reformation also directly or indirectly influenced many major shifts in society in Europe, including increase in literacy rates, so more people started learning how to read because they could now read the Bible in their own language. And in general, a new focus on education for all children was kind of reinforced through the Reformation. The Reformation also is credited as a key factor in the development of the state system and the establishment of relief for the poor and more social welfare programs. Now, while Luther and Calvin were leading the Reformation in Europe, another unlikely leader of the Reformation, really more by default than anything, was coming of age in England, and this is Henry VIII. So most of us are familiar with Henry VIII from the 6 wives he had. He just couldn't find one that he really liked. But he was really quite a Renaissance man and embodied a lot of the ideals of the Renaissance. But Henry VIII was also a devout Catholic, that is, until he needed a divorce. He was unhappy with his first marriage to Catherine and largely her inability to produce a male heir, so Henry sought a divorce, an annulment from Rome in order to marry his mistress Anne Boleyn. And unwilling to give him the divorce, Henry VIII basically got rid of the Catholic Church in England. Basically, Henry VIII said that if you won't give me an annulment, I will just kick you out and I'll become the head of my own church. So this is how we get the Anglican Church, with Henry VIII as the leader of it. So essentially, he started the Protestant movement in England, and really set up a long history of conflict between Protestants and Catholics in England. So here we have a graphic that kind of displays some of the big events we've talked about and all these people that influence it and how they're also kind of connected here. So up on one side you have the Renaissance, the other side you have the Reformation. You see how Thomas Aquinas helps influence the coming of the Renaissance. And then in the Reformation you have all these people like John Wycliffe and Martin Luther and John Huss who helped give us the Reformation. Henry VIII is very influenced by the Renaissance. And from the Reformation, we get this break with Rome, with the Pope. And because Henry VIII wants to marry Anne Boleyn, because he doesn't like any of his other wives, he starts his own church, the Church of England, which gives us Protestant England. And then as a result of the union between Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, we get Elizabeth I, who ends up ruling England for over 50 years and creates a largely Protestant nation in England.